There's a strange phenomena within us human beings. We believe we can think our way out of feeling our emotions, that we can get ahead of them, that there's something separate even outside of us. A saber-toothed tiger stalking us in the underbrush. This constant dodging and avoidance of the tiger is exhausting. We avoid the saber-toothed tiger, but instead fall into a spiked pit we had built in order to trap the tiger. Welcome back to Language of the Soul, conversations on healing and growth. I'm Ben Umstead.
And I'm Martin Perkins.
On today's episode, we wanted to explore the threads and consequences of hyper-rationality in a world of unprocessed emotion. To start, we have to define what we mean by hyper-rationality.
So, Cambridge University Press describes hyper-rationality as the use of reason to an unusual or extreme degree, often leading to a focus on logical and analytical reasoning, while disregarding emotions and subjective experience. It can be seen as a mental approach where decisions are made purely on rational thought, sometimes to the detriment of personal relationships and emotional understanding. We could reasonably place emotional reactivity, based on this definition, at the opposite end of the spectrum. Emotional reactivity is the tendency to respond to stimuli with intense and often disproportionate reaction, typically driven by stress or anxiety. This can lead to impulsive behaviors and outbursts that may not align with what's actually happening, the actual situation. The seeming polarity of these two ways of responding in life would seem to place them in opposition to each other. I offer a very different perspective. I see them as companions in a contemporary world where both remove depth of consideration from the process, a process of centering oneself in one's own unique wisdom, a wisdom being, contrary to popular belief, accessed through the felt experience in one's center by letting go of control. This is the nature of processing emotion, letting go into its mystery of non-rational meaning so that we can reconcile our feelings within a world that is cleaved off this facet of self in its rush to make sense of it. Its scientific American roots now passed down to Google and its plethora of rational answers, right? The answers, the best answers, the right answers. And in the process, I offer the question, what's happened to humans contemplating our own answer? And I don't mean researching our own answer. I mean contemplating, being with, from within our depths, the creative possibilities to the question or inquiry. As an example, I don't really have to think much about whether or not a given policy is right or wrong if it's being done from a place of reactivity, or it's being done from a place of hatred or anxiety or worry or anger. Where something comes from, its roots matter. Whether the policy unto itself is right or wrong, its roots matter. And what matters to me is what's my own truth in relation to this, a seeking of my own truth, knowing it need not be anybody else's. And as well, that other signature word in our political and social lives, in addition to truth, is fact. How do I seek a healthy relationship to fact? I offer by knowing that it's not a static thing. It can change as information, as knowledge grows. And that if I can hold both softly, both truth and fact softly, there's room enough in me for the world around me to change, because it's gonna. And I need not either only look at its hyper-rational lens. I need not look at it purely through its factual lens, but I also need not look at it exclusively through an emotional response, because I'm bringing both of them into the depths of me and allowing myself to be with them. And I believe that brilliant thinkers do exactly that. They bring both the emotional component as well as the factual information into their depths, and they bring it into contemplation, and they let it be there together. That's why Einstein sought quiet contemplation on long walks. I believe that practice was passed down to him by Darwin, who went on 3 45-minute walks each day. I know that in my own experience, I saunter through the forest twice each day. Now, this is in addition to my meditation practice and as well my practice in soul journaling. However, that time being in the forest, allowing the trees, nature to have its way with me, is in many ways a way to integrate, to allow the whole of me to be brought into a sense of being where my truth arrives in relation to the facts of the day.
Yeah, that really resonates very deeply with me in terms of my daily walks in, more suburbia, very green suburbia, right? But that contemplation this morning, taking that walk for 45 minutes after meditation and knowing through the breath, through the motion, that some deeper sense of contemplation was happening. And it wasn't, just in my head. Thoughts came through, really delicious things. When we talk about our daily practices, especially in terms of how our wisdom arises, how that unique wisdom arises, like you note, in terms of truth and fact, being flexible, being soft. It's curious because I look around and see friends and family who, when they don't have a consistent practice, where wisdom comes from. And I mean, this moment of meeting someone else's wisdom, I find that a lot of the time it's lured out by art and storytelling. Many of us are drawn to characters in media who live on an edge and are really willing to engage with that edge and take the leap. So many of our stories that we return to are about just the human experience, something that is so unique and universal. I mean, I I think about sometimes how you wear your Star Trek t-shirt, and it's Mr. Spock's science officer blue. And that says something about the incredible long lasting resonance of Mr. Spock being one of those characters, and Leonard Nimoy as the actor and co-creator really bringing something of his own wisdom to this character in a time, when Spock was introduced in 1966, a moment where there was incredible escalation in many international movements and wars, coups d'etats, technological advances, the hyper-rational logic, unprocessed emotion, the intensity of that. Here comes Spock in Star Trek, in Starfleet, traveling across the cosmos in the Enterprise. And he's a half human, half Vulcan. He's a hybrid, caught between his vibrant human emotions and the cold doctrinal logic of his Vulcan upbringing, right? So in this way, Spock, I feel, can be seen as a symbol of what happens when we mistake one facet of ourselves as the whole self, when it becomes who we are. Across Spock's journey through the cosmos, he continually encounters bias, doctrine, dogma, and strife. His discordance and desire for control within himself, within his familial habits and patterns, human and Vulcan, can only last so long in that form. Because there's that uniqueness, he develops a practice that's entirely his own in which his inner wisdom blossoms. And as he states himself in Star Trek VI, The Undiscovered Country, the final film with the original cast. And it would be interesting to know if Leonard Nimoy came up with this line or if it was written by the screenwriter. But Spock says, logic is the beginning of wisdom, not the end of it. And I love that gentleness there. I would offer that as these strict systems of logic and hyper-rationality soften, the contemplation you spoke of, Martin, in relation to Einstein's walks, your own saunters through the forest, that contemplation as well as discernment begins to unfold within us when those systems soften. In such grace, these ways in which we consider the world from our inner perspective, right? Our inner wisdom. They aren't driven by fear, anxiety, or worry so much anymore, but curiosity and what I feel. And this is very important and personal to me, but I feel that there's a universal conduit here. Our inherent need for play. Hi, everyone. If you've been enjoying our podcast, please consider visiting martinperkins.com for more healing and growth resources.
In my herbal practice, I have been inspired to synthesize a number of approaches in order to serve my clients. At the core is cultivating a healthy microbiome. We begin there. We gather a depth of knowledge, body, mind, and spirit, so that herbal approaches can be offered in the needed order to address the present symptoms while also treating the root causes.
To schedule a consult, you can visit the Herbs and Nutrition page. And now, back to the conversation.
That word play, it is something that you and I keep coming back to because of the nature in which humanity cleaves off play from us as we begin our adulthood. Without it, the kinds of practices that we're talking about make it really hard for us to reconcile what we're feeling in relation to the world as it moves about around us, whether it be our inner circles of family and friends and all the way out to the geopolitical and on the national and international level. And I think there's a kind of old school wisdom to it all, and us recognizing, okay, it's important that we deal with this at the mental and emotional level, but I think it's also important that we acknowledge that what doesn't get processed emotionally, reactive emotions like anxiety and worry and anger and frustration and deep sadnesses that become compartmentalized within us, if we don't address those things, they will find expression in the body in the form of chronic issues, right? And so really learning to listen through our wisdom to what our bodies are telling us. So if there's one really big nugget that anyone can take from this conversation around hyper-rationality and in a world of unprocessed emotion, is that I would offer, in this time when there is actually a national conversation going on around the nature of chronic disease, it's really important that we consider the possibility that overthinking and not processing what we're actually feeling emotionally is playing a huge role in the epidemic of chronic diseases that are now proliferating, not just in our country, but all around the world. So, a good starting point is rest when you're tired or in pain, to learn, because oftentimes, our culture doesn't do a very good job of teaching us what foods we need in order to nourish ourselves and learning what works for us. Because there isn't one way. There's many ways, but what we do know is that the more processed the food is, the less likely it's going to be nourishing for us. So getting back to the roots of fresh vegetables, small helpings of meat if you're a meat eater, incorporating grains into the diet in ways that feel nourishing and not inflammatory. And in particular, as it pertains to moving the body, learning how to move the body, how to exercise in ways that feel like it's an expression of joy. But there's a joy of movement that I love my walks in the woods. During a period prior to me doing a lot, mostly just walking as my exercising, I was a swimmer. And I loved being in the water. I was, for a period of time, for a couple years, doing a lot of mountain biking. And just the sheer joy and playfulness of mountain biking was just, it was a blast. These are all the ways that we find ease by allowing our experiences, our healthy experiences, to help us heal and grow, rather than continuing a kind of compartmentalization of who we are. I'm this, but I'm not that. And, all these fragmented pieces, fragmented by unprocessed emotion, by choosing to see our lives and our world only through its hyper-rational lens. And in many cases, toggling back and forth between a kind of reactive, unprocessed emotion and a need to make sense of it. All these ways, they prevent us from accessing a way to bring into a kind of shared frequency our thoughts, our hearts, our wisdom, to allow us to kind of be within ourselves in the moment. In Language of the Soul, a year-long course I offer to my community, I focus a great deal around helping human beings find their unique expression of self-knowledge. In each of us, there's a unique genius that's ours and ours only. My calling, my expression as a teacher is about helping my students find that unique genius within themselves. There's several ways of taking the course, and I encourage you to explore it if you're a human being seeking to know themselves more deeply.
For more info on the course and to sign up, you can visit the courses and workshops page on martinperkins.com. Our free movie club returns for the summer, starting on June 21st with No Other Land, and then Hannah Arendt Facing Tyranny on June 27th, and Three Colors Red on July 27th. To RSVP to any or all screenings, go on over to upcoming events. As burgeoning podcasters, the greatest gift you can offer Martin and I is to share this podcast with just one person. Word of mouth remains the most genuine way to share the art and media that you love and care about. So in advance, we thank you. And now, back to the conversation. The joy of movement is such a extraordinary thing. And I say that word and kind of laugh at myself for using that word, because it can be, and it is, a daily thing. So it ends up feeling quite ordinary. But there is this flourish, this quality. When that's happening, I don't feel so fragmented. I don't feel so compartmentalized in that joy of movement. The wisdom is coming through me. I sing the body electric, as Walt Whitman wrote. So there is that fragmentation, that we've touched upon in relation to rest and tapping into that wisdom. Let's talk about that fragmentation a bit more in relation to unprocessed emotion. Anger has a certain edge for all of us.
So a way of looking at anger from an energetic place, I'd offer from a place of wisdom, is that we can look at anger and say it can either go up or it can go down. If it goes down, there's a conscious way to allow it to come down, and there's the unconscious way in which anger is tamped down and just not expressed, right? And many people are taught anger isn't okay. And so they don't express their anger and they tamp it down. They don't grieve it. That's the other way that you can deal with your anger. And there's also the discernment. Is the anger reactive or is the anger righteous? Is it justified? Right? If we define anger as the unwillingness or inability to accept life as it is, there's lots of cases where anger can feel true to us. But then the question is, do we have any control over what we're angry about? Is there an effective way to channel that anger, that righteous anger? If there isn't, then it needs to be grieved. And if it's not grieved, then it kind of festers inside because it's hot. That unexamined anger ends up being it has a very warming effect in the body. And over time, you'll see it, right? Some of the people who we see in our lives who are experiencing hypertension, they often have a lot of unresolved anger. Not always. That's not everyone's dynamic. It's some people's. I'm not suggesting a universal causation. I'm simply describing that this is how it can look, right? The vessels, the blood vessels constrain, the arteries constrain, everything gets tighter because we're angry.
The righteous anger really hits home for me. There are definitely periods in my life where reactive anger was really potent in me and I felt ashamed of it. And there was this narrative of what's wrong with me? What's wrong with Ben? You know, even that, the extension to others. You experienced that firsthand on definitely several occasions, if not more. And the root of that was a righteous anger. The reactionary was unexamined, unprocessed, righteous anger. And for me, I notice that when I let it fester, it can arise both physically and mentally in ways that really resonate with the stories, the experiences, the possibilities of what our bodies, who we are as a collection of channels of blood vessels can do in hypertension. So, I mean, physically for me, there's inflammation, insomnia, sinus blockages, dryness, problems with digestion and bladder and liver, feeling stuck. And emotionally and mentally, I mean, it appears we've talked about overthinking in relation to hyper-rationality. That really drives the show sometimes. And that then turns into degree of resentment, but especially cynicism or pessimism. Those can seep into my view of myself and the world. Because if I look at the human world and the constructs and systems we've made, many of them, you know, through this desire for control and a hyper-rational order, especially through capitalism, it's easy for me to feel fragmented by that cynicism or pessimism, you know, and I use both because they show up based off of what I'm pushing against, what I'm choosing to create tension, you know, from within me to it. And often it is a real issue or real thing, but then I abstract it in my mind, right? And get stuck with it. So in these times of such tension, my inner life, you know, you talk about that festering, becomes a swamp of sorrow, and in short order that's reflected in the world and how, you know, how I engage and inhabit shared spaces. So that shared frequency that you touched upon within us, it can feel absent, or abstracted to something that I have to obtain, that I have to reach or grasp for, right? When I'm feeling so miserable about these systems, it's a fear trap.
Yeah. And that notion of a kind of shared frequency of being. Yes, I'm describing an inner experience, but I'm also describing an interrelational experience. You know, what some of us will sometimes describe as being in the flow, right? I'm in the flow. Everything's rolling. Everything's like things are just happening. And my offering is that when that happens and someone really can't point to how the relationship between that experience of flow and their inner practice, I describe it as accidental wisdom, right? They did some things that represented a level of self-care, right? It's not entirely clear to them the relationship between those things that they did or the ways that they were being with themselves and that sense of flow. So it was accidental. What I've learned through my own inner practice is that direct causal relationship between an embodied inner practice and how the flow expresses itself. That's an embodied sense of wisdom. We know the relationship between our choices, our actions, and that sense of flow. So in that way, it can be replicated. Not that it shows up the same way, but that the practice of being in an embodied relationship with the part of us that is wise in nature leads to more flow, more of that shared frequency of being. And as a result, it becomes part of us, we become part of it, not just in the sense of an inner experience, but also with the world around us, right? It's not separate from, right? There's a Native American phrasing of using that term, I become part of it. The recognition is that in that phrasing, we're all connected. We've all always been connected, whether we're talking about humans or animals or sea creatures or insects, or, all biologic creatures. All that is, we're all connected to it. And that's what that turn of phrase means. I become part of it means I'm connected to all that is. And what we're in many ways describing is a practice that allows us to experience that inside ourselves. And in part, what we're allowing in is the sacred dimension of life. We're learning not to withhold parts of ourselves because they might be seen as wounded or broken.
Yeah, I mean, sharing those aspects, it's really important to hone in and note the full practice, which is, as you have so wonderfully put, allowing that sacred dimension of life, become a part of it through rest, through wisdom. And I know that when I'm quiet and kind and patient with myself, that it starts there. And yet the shared frequency that we're talking about, it begins within me, but it's this energetic that really is, I would posit, the heartbeat of life, of Mother Earth, of everything that we're a part of. And so that unique wisdom, we talk about the wonderful nature of a story being unique and personal and universal. Everyone has their wisdom, and the way that it arises can be different. And it arises in me in a whole plethora of ways, right? It can be a very simple, steady, quiet voice, myself, that integrated whole flower. And I go, I know what I'm doing right now in this moment in terms of talk about, joy and expression of that. Sometimes it can take another shape and emotion, like really feeling them. And so when we talk about the unprocessed emotions, it's like, what can that look like for us when we're with them? Truly feeling whatever may be at that edge. So for me, I know that I may cry, I may scream or growl. We've talked about our experiences in taking walks, in finding ways to move. And quite often, the contemplation that you and I both experience on our saunters through the world, that is that grounding in being okay, in feeling good about what may be a little more uncomfortable, like the need to scream, the need to shout or growl. Oh my gosh. I mean, to dance. Other times it may be more poetic, right? I may write, I may have that inclination, that ping, that soulful beep, 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 ho, 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 to sing or to write. And sometimes it's that writing with a fever. saying, okay, I need to not be so hard on myself, and it's going to be messy, and it might be very based in reactionary feelings. But if I put it on the page, I'm transforming it. So I write in that fever until the gentle breeze of wisdom, it comes back around. There's that kernel, there's that voice of wisdom that then might find detours in expression. Everything softens again. And for me, the self-doubt that I can mistake for judgment, that roiling, boiling frustration that I can feel in my guts and in my pelvis, and the resentment that I noted that arises with anger, especially anger that I hold against a society that, when I'm really frustrated about it and really pessimistic about it, society that seemingly wants to isolate and alienate us into just being these cheap, fleshy worker drones, those wounded or broken parts, but those seemingly wounded or broken parts of me, they don't disappear. I really want to emphasize that, because we talk a lot about being fearless and in relationship to fear, and transmuting fear, transforming, integrating that. The wounds and the broken pieces, they don't disappear. Rather, I know, and it's not really a beginning, it's a remembrance, that there's simply a part of me and of that shared frequency pulsing within tenderness and grace.
As you speak, I'm aware that all those parts of me that I had seen earlier in my life as being wounded or broken are now a part of me in a different way. I see them as existing at my soul's table. That there's a big old table with all of my wounded younger selves sitting there, acknowledging that at some point or another they played a crucial role in who I am, and they play an equally crucial role in who I've grown to be. And I don't want to cleave those parts of me off. There's a place for them. They don't need to lead, but they are there often to inform, right? And in that way, it gives space to like a create, that shared frequency of being. It allows us to see it through a creative lens, right? That we are all, that shared frequency, that we're a part of and that notion of a shared frequency of being, we're part of a whole, but each part, each of us, in any given moment, are presenting something that's the unique genius of ourselves in that moment, right? And in many ways, we've talked about play, and we've talked about grieving in this process, but we also need to bring in the notion of creativity and the realization that life is, no matter what the nature of our choices, and no matter whether or not we see ourselves as artistic or, God forbid, artists, or I love the Picasso quote: "We are all born artists." And then at some point or another, for many of us, in some people, that creativity is nurtured and cared for by their families, their communities. And for others of us, we have to find ways throughout our lives to reclaim it. But in many ways, I would offer many of us, we start focusing on not getting it wrong. I don't want to get it wrong. I want to do it right. It's got to be right. Right? And that saps the creative opportunity, the real opportunity, which is getting it wrong. Like really letting go on the idea that it's okay to get it wrong over and over and over and over and over again. That none of us are going to, draw or paint or build or do anything with this state of like, oh, I got it right the first time. If we get it right the first time, there's not a lot of opportunity for growth in that. There really isn't. So in that way, we get to embrace our vulnerabilities rather than keeping them hidden. So to embrace our vulnerabilities rather than making them hidden wounds is how we avoid being overly rational or out of center in our emotion. We give ourselves enough space to be who we are in this moment. Without it, there's no way to find the new ways to do this thing we call life, to cultivate a sense of belonging that embraces the whole of who we are and what we seek for ourselves. Or as we shared in our last podcast, and I think it bears repeating because it's so wise, Hannah Arendt puts it this way: this world is our home. It is our deepest belonging. And I would add that we belong to it and it belongs to us. And in that way, we become part of it.